Right, we're Kristen and Benjamin Ronaldo. As I said, I wrote this down, so Ben doesn't even really know what it says. So I'm just going to give you a update on CFP membership and a couple other things. So as of yesterday, and as up to date as I am on our membership date information, we have 95 affiliates. They are, besides the US, they are from the UK, Philippines, Canada, Australia, South Africa, Russia, Hungary, Spain, Colombia, Germany, and Italy. We have 30 people who have completed formation, and other countries include Sweden, Nigeria, and Benin. Let's see, pledged 1 year 4, pledged and vowed 29, pledged life 17, and that makes a total of 50. And from outside the US, they are from South Africa, New Zealand, Canada, India, Kenya, and the Philippines. So total in formation are 119. We have 40 inquirers, 16 novice 1, 8 novice 2, and 7 novice 3. I should have said postulants first. Postulants, there are 48. And they, for the people in formation, they are from outside of the US, Venezuela, Australia, Tanzania, Austria, Nigeria, Kenya, Philippines, Canada, Hong Kong, England, Kenya, and Germany. And I do have 16 or more pending inquiries that I either we weren't able to get in contact with them and I just need to sort of clean up those numbers, or we have some more recent ones that I just haven't had a chance to assign to the regional ministers to talk to. And our deceased members, we have 10 affiliates, 5 who completed formation, 12 in formation when they died, and 6 life pledge. And I'm still working, I think I say this every time, I'm working on updating our database for accuracy. I'm going to contact those who have not communicated with us lately. Ruth has been doing a really good job. Ruth is she's now is she considered like the mother, the house mother? The administrator for the women's house. She had been, I think she might still be doing it, going through she just takes a pile of folders and goes through and she's calling everyone. And it's actually gotten a few people to come back who had been maybe in formation and they, lapsed or whatever, or were thinking about entering formation and they filled out applications or contacted us and said, how can I start doing this again? So that's been good. It's also shown where I need to try and contact people because their contact information is not correct. And I'm going to clean up those pending inquirers because usually, as most of you know, when we get an inquiry application, someone has to interview the person to make sure that they're who they say they are and there's nothing too outside of the norm, or they follow the Catholic teaching. So house update. Ben began meeting with all the residents in both houses, and he attended a house meeting at the men's house. And now we're going to be splitting up the houses. I'm going to take the women's house residences, and Ben is going to continue to meet with the men's house residents. Let's see where it was. The men have actually had several get-togethers since they've gained occupancy of their house, and so we've been over there a few times, and they have also opened their house up so we can have our monthly circle meetings there. And in the past, the women's house they've let us have gatherings there too. So just more recently, it's been at the men's house. Do you have anything else to add about the men?
The men's house? Well, they're finally in the house now.
Yeah, they're in the house. That's important.
They seem pretty settled in, and
Yes.
they have it arranged the way they want it to be.
So looks very nice. And Mary's Glen, I don't know if Madeline wants to give more information, but it's Mary's Glen's open every day. The chapel, the healing chapel there is open every day. I did remember to unlock the door this morning. And I've seen some people in there, and I know at least one CCD class, they brought their Right, I think she said she talked to you, the lady. I just happened to run into her. She said, oh, I'm bringing my CCD class here.
Oh, then she came back with her family.
And then she came back with her family on a Sunday. They had, I think it was like Mother's Day or something. They had a picnic in the Glen. So, so that was really nice. So, and that's what I have. If you want to add anything, Madeline, I don't know. Here, I have the.
Man coming to the men's house in September, a young man. And then we have another man that's inquiring to possibly be coming in there. So we'll see what happens with that. But anyway, both the houses are doing well, and thanks be to God. Keep Elizabeth Lemire in your prayers. I told you that before, because she's not feeling well. She had been the previous house administrator, so she's trying to recuperate. So if you just keep her in your prayers. Ruth took over for Elizabeth. I think the Rinaldos are doing a great job. So thank you. Okay. We are looking for a gift shop administrator because they're both working full time now. So we need somebody to do the management of the gift shop. We have somebody that may do that, but we're trying to work out details with that. So, okay. So let's, maybe we'll start with a little prayer. We're going to talk about our rule of life. So Lord, we ask you to be with us, keep us in your care, help us to follow you and to live our rule joyfully and in the spirit that it was written, so that we become more like Christ would have us become, Lord. And we ask this in your name. Amen. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, and thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Okay, now I'm going to pass out the original rule so everybody has a copy of the original rule. This is the rule of 1221. It's the original rule.
I forgot to say we did have 8 new postulates that just started
Right.
in August.
Yep. And that number, you said 6 died of life pledged? I thought there was more.
I wonder if they're just not all in the access database. I wonder.
Well, I mean, I thought of 6.
Yeah.
Maybe Sister Faustina would remember. Bill Eddy, Grace French, Ed Moss, Stephanie Sullivan. I think where the other is. Philip, Amy Jolliker, yes, and Philip Klein.
Yeah.
Now those were 6, and they were life pledged.
They were life pledged.
Now, is there anybody? Who am I forgetting? I mean, I know Nancy Meyer died, but she wasn't. She was an associate.
She was an associate,
Yeah.
What about Roger Bisweather?
No, he didn't. No. Yeah, we had other people die in formation. Maybe it is 6. That's possible. Okay. We need one more? Oh, what did I miss? All right. Thank you. Okay. So as I was thinking about our rule, it occurred to me that this original rule was written to help people combat the 7 deadly sins, I think. I mean, to get closer to the Lord, but if you read this, we can find places in here where the 7 deadly sins are actually being targeted, I think. So, we'll start with the very, at the beginning. Well, maybe we should list the deadly sins. That's why I had this up here. All right, so let's see if we can list them all. We'll figure out the corresponding virtues. All right, so let's start naming. Anybody want to name the first one? Pride. All right. Okay. Yep, okay, we can know them all. Pride, envy, sloth, okay. Yep, gluttony. I should tell Father not to talk. Okay. Lust. Yep. Wrath. Do we have much wrath? Missing one. One more. One more. You'll know it as soon as somebody says it. More.
Acedia. Greed.
Acedia is sloth. Yeah. How do we?
Acedia is sloth, right?
A-C-E-D-I-A, is that how we spell it? Okay. Now, if we look at these 7 deadly sins, we can see what the corresponding virtues are. Father talked about this last year, I think it was. Okay. So the corresponding virtue for pride is?
Humility.
Humility. Okay. Now, envy, I thought was hard. I had to look this one up on the internet. The corresponding virtue for envy. Kindness, charity, yes. Corresponding verse for sloth is?
Diligence.
Diligence, yes. How about gluttony? Temperance. Temperance, moderation. Lust is chastity. Wrath is, what's the opposite of anger or wrath? Patience.
Patience.
And greed is
Generosity.
generosity, liberality, they call it, yeah. Okay. So now, if we start looking at our rule with these in mind, we're going to find that these are all of these vices are covered in the rule by having us practice these corresponding virtues. So if you just start looking even at the very beginning, like the first part here, this is the primitive rule of 1221. Here begins the rule of the continent brothers and sisters. So what are we hitting first? What do they mean by continent? Chaste. It means chaste, temperate, people that control themselves, basically. Okay, so we're hitting basically all of these right here at the very beginning. Now, I'm going to try to take these sections of the rule in parts. So the way we go over them in our constitutions and the way we go over them in our formation. So the first part of the original rule is daily life, which talks about the clothing and possessions, basically. You know, that's the first, but we don't do that until the 3rd year of formation. So I'm going to talk about that this afternoon. Then the second part is about the abstinence and fasting. And then the third part is about the prayer. So we kind of do these backwards. We do the prayer for novice 1, then fasting and abstinence for novice 2, and then the daily life, or what they call daily life here, the clothing, whatever, for novice 3. And the reason we do that is because we don't want people to go throw out their wardrobes and then decide they're not going to continue with us. As you heard from the from Kristen and Ben's summary, we have a lot of inquirers, and then we have, you know, a good number of people that go into postulancy, but then there's these drops. So you see the numbers go down as you go through the years. So, and that's just to be expected. That's with any type of order like this. You know, Father has it too when people join the friars. But anyway, in this one, in the friars, well, if they join the friars, they get rid of their clothes right away from the beginning. You know, but in our case, it's a little bit different. Yeah.
Partially, they don't.
Yeah.
And then, like, so I was in the seminary for 3 years just as a student before we ever wore anything journal. And then your postulancy, you're just in lay clothes. They used to have them in suits
Okay.
years ago, and then not novitiate. Then, you know, it's sort of a slow process.
Slow
You
process.
put the habit on with no knots.
Uh-huh.
right? And then when you take vows, you put the
Knots
knots.
in.
And we also have a temperate, we have the caparone, which is a little like scapular, that when they're novices, they wear that, and then they take it off at first profession. And then, so it's
a
clothing
gradual.
is also part of our tradition also.
Right, so it's a kind of a gradual thing. Right, okay, very good. So that's what we do. All right, so let's look at the prayer first, since that's what we do first in our formation. So if we look over here at chapter 4 is prayer. Now I brought this is not too long of a section here, but in our constitutions, which is how we live the rule, it's quite a bit longer. But if we look at the prayer section, now this is helping us to get closer to the Lord, for sure. That's the whole purpose of this rule. But there's quite a bit of prayer here, as you notice, quite a bit of prayer. So what virtue do you think this is mainly combating here? Yes, that's what I think. I think that this whole section on prayer is targeted not only to help us to get closer to the Lord, to realize our penance, because these psalms that we're praying are penitential psalms that deal with humility. If you look at Psalm 51, for example, or the other psalms we pray, you're admitting that you're a sinner. So that's humble. That's acting against pride. But then it's also the extent of the praying, the amount of praying, I think definitely works against sloth. So, it's not whether you want to do it or feel like doing it or whatever. I mean, you do it anyway. You be diligent about it. You do these prayers, and you do the office and so on. Because we're not required as Catholics to do any of this. I mean, we're required to go to Sunday Mass, and go to confession like once a year or something. I mean, that's what we're required to do. Where our rule requires a lot more. It requires the Psalms, the prayers, the CFP prayers. The original rule said confession. I think it was 3 times a year, which was a lot at those days. Yeah. That was a lot. Because people used to go maybe once in a lifetime or something before they died. So this was requiring more. So that deals with this and that. Yes, Ben?
It also works with temperance and patience too, because you have to be temperate in your schedule. Like you can't try to do everything.
That's true.
You have to stop your life to do these. At least that's how I do it. I stop what I'm doing and try.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, Ben. So you have to be temperate with how you're living your life, and not try to get everything, do everything. Because I think all of us that are pledged here have realized that we can't do everything. So we have to cut stuff out. Maybe we cut out the newspaper. Maybe we watch television. We cut out some things to make time for this prayer. So that's working on that as well. Because gluttony doesn't only have to deal with food.
Right.
It has to deal with possessions. It has to deal with like activities, like wanting more and more of this or that or whatever. Running after things other than after the Lord, trying to collect stuff and thinking somehow that's going to make us happy and fill us up if we have more of whatever it is. So, okay, that's good.
The spiritual gluttony too, where you want to do all the religious things out there.
Yes, that's right. That's right, spiritual gluttony, that's a good point. So that's why we have a rule, because this is what we follow. We follow this rule, not that other rule, all these novenas or whatever. I mean, you can say your novenas and stuff, but you won't have time to say all the novenas that are out there, trust me. You won't have time to say all the chaplets that are out there. I mean, just can't. Yes, Father?
I think the other extreme is the minimalism.
Right.
For most Catholics, they say, well, I only have to go to confession once a year. I say, well, what if you said, well, you're only required to take a bath once a year?
Right, yeah.
Most people prefer to do that more often.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, that's what this, yeah. This, I think maybe in Francis's time, they didn't have so much of the spiritual gluttony of people trying to do like too many things spiritually. But they would have had this slow thing about, well, they're busy making money or, managing their properties or whatever they're doing and not taking the time for the prayer. So that's a good point. I like that point about the bath. Would you take a bath only once a year? Just like people go to confession once a year. That's a good point, Father. Remember that. Okay, so let's go on. Now we kind of covered the prayer aspect here. So let's go up to the fasting and abstinence aspect. Now that, of course, I think you can see mainly would deal with gluttony, temperance, moderation, because we have these days of fasting and abstinence. And it's, for some people, that's a very difficult part of the rule because they're used to eating, like grazing around. That's what I was doing. Like, you know, you eat when you're hungry, you pick this, you pick that, you know, it's like, so this is making you be more temperate. I'm going to eat at these 2 times a day and not in between. If I want something, I'll take a glass of juice or water or something like that. I'm not going to just graze around. Today's different. Today's the assumption. So you'll see people picking around here, but that's okay. You can do that we can do that on Solemnity. So yeah, on a Solemnity we can celebrate with the food. But other ways, we just going to eat just twice a day. Or not, maybe in our constitutions we have a little bite to eat if you need something else at another time of the day, which some people do. Now, this part of our rule in the fasting and abstinence, if you look at it, it was always tempered by necessity, health necessity. For example, under fasting, it says sisters who are pregnant are free to refrain until their purification from the corporal observances, except those regarding their dress and prayers. So, and then it says in here about the sick can say the hours if they want to, and it also that's under the prayer one. Under the abstinence one, it says, except for the feeble, the ailing, and those traveling, let them be content with dinner and supper. So there were moderations in this original rule for people that can't do these practices. So we have that in our rule. So if somebody has diabetes or something and they have to eat like, you know, every so many hours, I mean, you just do that. You know, we don't want people getting some kind of insulin reaction or something here. I mean, just do what you have to do. But for people that are normally healthy, they can follow this rule. Now, this is where it says those engaged in fatiguing work will be allowed to take food 3 times a day. That's where we got that on our rule, that if you need a bite to eat another time, you can take it. So sometimes people are engaged in fatiguing work. So in those days, it probably was working in the fields or something. Now today, it might just be working in an office where, you know, you're really have to really be alert and so forth. So if you feel work is fatiguing, you need something else, you can take something, a small amount, just to keep your energy levels up, you know, during the day. But that particularly, I think, works with temperance, okay, right here, this part of the rule. It also works a little bit, I think, with humility and pride, because if you're at some type of a group gathering where there's a lot of foods, like a lot of meat foods on an abstinence day, and you don't take it, that's a little bit of a humbling thing that you don't take this nice steak that's sitting there. Huh? And you don't tell anybody you're doing it, so nobody can say, oh, you're not doing it because of that. So you just don't take that. They'll think you're vegetarian or something, whatever. But I think that kind of works in there as well for us. Now, as you know, I'm just going to say this, as you know in our rule, if you are invited to somebody's house on a day when we don't eat meat and they serve, like you sit down to dinner and they serve you chicken, mashed potatoes, and peas, you don't say, well, I'm not eating meat today. You just eat your chicken and don't call attention to it and don't embarrass your hostess or host, whatever. But if you go to a buffet, then you bypass it. So, okay, you bypass the meat. All right. Anybody have anything you want to share about that part? All right. I'm going to leave the clothing part till this afternoon. Yes, Father, go ahead.
I just say one thought about it. I give retreats to religious around the country, and monks, intense part of the monastic tradition. Mm-hmm. And I mean, always kind of connected to, the passions. So like for a lot of people in our culture for whom there's no break on any kind of foods and all kinds of stuff, that, and I still remember growing up when McDonald's was new and there was one in our town, and, you went there as a kind of like a fun thing, like once in a while, but people didn't use them as dining rooms, right? I mean, people didn't live on these processed foods and stuff. I mean, for all kinds of medical reasons, this kind of self-control, even doctors are telling us that, like the processed foods are just killing our culture, and sodas and things. I mean, even my grandfather had a restaurant, and back in the 50s, my dad used to say there was this woman there every morning when he opened the restaurant, had to get a 6-pack of Coca-Cola every single morning. Even back then, because it was addictive even then, But, a lot of these things that have become part of our diet they were products of either the war because they had to process foods, or they were, things that were considered, exceptional treats or something like that, and they become part of our standard diet. And also then you see also the rise of a lack of temperance in other areas, because the reason that the monks fasted was also to keep the passions down, right? Because there's something about fasting that calms the passions. And, when you look at our pornographic culture today, and all of the terrible abuse that goes on in the culture when it comes to sexuality, right? A lot of that is the product of being intemperate, right? And so that, these are, as Madeline said, they're often connected to other things, but I would say it's also connected to chastity.
Yes,
right,
that's
because
it.
it always was. I mean, the reason that men went to the monastery wasn't because they were incapable of having wives, so it was the fasting part of the life for monastics actually calms the natural passions, and certain kinds of foods, especially like alcohol and sugars and things like that, stir up the passions. So, if you look at the unbridled sort of sensuality in the culture, a lot of it is also related to the unbridled diet in the culture.
That's a good point.
So it's just an interesting point to part. Those two are also, gluttony and lust, also connected.
That's good. That's a very good point. Yes, I can see that connection.
Right.
Yeah. Good. Thank you, Father.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to skip over here to the parts of the rule that talks about sacraments and other matters, etc. Down section 5 on page 2 here. Now, I mentioned about this confession of sins 3 times a year. And that's what it says in the original rule. I call it confession at least 3 times a year. And when you would receive communion, that was also unusual. People didn't receive communion all the time. This is actually more reception of communion before. So again, we're talking about the sacraments, which again deals with a city here or slow. So people actually have to go to church to receive these sacraments, to go to these services, go to confession or whatever. Now, we didn't talk much about wrath here, but this starts to get into the wrath part here, patience here. Because it's right under the first section, section 15, under sacraments and other matters, it says they're to be reconciled with their neighbors, which means if you're angry with somebody, you need to go back and make up with them as much as you can and not hold that wrath toward the neighbor, or it could be in your family, and restore what belongs to them. So they're not just talking about saying, I'm sorry, but actually making up for it. So basically, the penance for your past actions is to make restitution as much as you can for whatever you did. And it says, it tells you right here, to make up for past tithes and pay future tithes. So if they're behind on their tithes, they've been greedy or whatever, they need to get those tithes taken care of if they haven't paid them. And if they haven't paid them because of maybe financial need or something, they have to try to figure out some way to make up those tithes. So, and then to going forward to pay them. Now, it does say in here also about debt. Let me see if I can find that place. Maybe somebody will find it before me. About debts. They're supposed to pay up their debts when they enter. Where is it here? Here it is. It's on page, well, it's on section 29. When they want to enter the brotherhood, when they wanted to enter the penitents, they were supposed to restore what belongs to others, and then they had to pay up their debts. Now, that's why we say, they says pay up their tithes or pay up their debts and not incur other debts, make satisfaction of debts. That deals with greed, and also going forward, not to do anything where you're going to incur debt. Now, I know in this culture it's a little bit hard for people sometimes to have a car or a house, like a big thing, without getting some kind of payments on it or something. So, I mean, those kinds of things that might be necessities for someone, I mean, the rule isn't going to say you can't have a car if you don't have the money to pay for it. But we would encourage people not to be getting loans or paying on credit or something with stuff that really you don't need, like clothing or a new appliance. If your old appliance, you can keep it going or something like that, or just because you want to have new clothes or whatever. So that's
Kindness and charity.
yeah, kindness, charity, also greed, because sometimes people want things and then they buy them on credit.
Kind of similar.
Yeah, they're similar. Yep. So a lot of these things kind of work together here, but diligence would work about trying to pay up those debts and not incur new ones. So and temperance for moderation there. So again, you don't have more than you need, and you don't be trying to get everything in the world, that sort of thing, especially if you're paying it with debts or something. So or paying it on debt. So now let's see here. Let's continue with this. Now talking here about oaths and lethal weapons. Now again, that would be the lethal weapons would have to do with anger, with wrath, to not taking up lethal weapons. Now the original penitents, maybe a lot of them didn't even have lethal weapons, but some of them did because they were fighting for their lords. And so this whole prescription here about not taking up lethal weapons or bearing them about is really what helped break the feudal system, because there were so many people that were doing penance and they couldn't take up these weapons. So now the lords didn't have people that were going to fight for them. And so the lords had to make peace now, or somehow figure out their disputes somehow. So that's...
Well, what about self-defense matters?
Pardon me?
What about self-defense? I know you
Well,
say
yeah,
take
so-
up against anybody, but
Right.
can you have them if you're just going to use them for self-defense?
It's in our constitutions that if you need it for self-defense, then it is permitted, but you have to have, your spiritual director has to allow that. We can look at here in the Constitution here. It's number 16, let me see here. But in the original rule, they weren't supposed to have them at all. Okay. They are not to take up, this is from the constitutions, bear lethal weapons that would be used against other human beings with the exception of participation in a just war, with the permission of the penitent's spiritual director, or as part of one's legitimate employment, police officers, for example. If a penitent is living in a dangerous environment in which a weapon may be necessary for self-defense, a spiritual director must approve the penitent's possession of any weapon. Hunting and fishing to provide meat for one's family is permitted. One is also permitted to kill animal, bird, or insect pests that may be destroying one's food supply or threatening one's life or goods. So that's what it's in the Constitution. Now, hunting and fishing to provide meat for one's family is permitted. What would not be permitted for a penitent would be go and do what Teddy Roosevelt did, which was go out to Africa and shoot the animals, bring back the trophies. That's not permitted. Yes, Ben?
What about competitive shooting?
Well, that's,
Archery?
I think that doesn't, you're only using that to shoot at a target. You're not, yeah, so I mean, I don't think that's applicable here. I don't think they did that in those days. I mean, they did falconry and stuff, but I mean,
Probably archery, but that's,
yeah,
archery wasn't really, most people wouldn't use it against a human
Yeah.
being because archery for combat is different at that time.
right,
The heavier draws in the bow.
Yeah.
Just you're.
It's saying take up lethal weapons against anybody. That's what it says here. So like if you're doing target shooting or, archery contests or something, you're not taking the weapons up against anybody. Okay. All right, so let's look here, continue looking here. Now we get to the one where it says all are to refrain from formal oaths unless, that's number 17 under chapter 5, unless where necessity compels, in the cases accepted by the sovereign pontiff and his indult, that is, for peace, for the faith under calumny and in bearing witness. So these oaths are, again, these were oaths being made to the Lord's. You know, you swear allegiance to your Lord or your King, or, you know, these kinds of things that you weren't supposed to be doing. So, because then you're kind of committed to that. And that could lead to wrath, you know, fighting in your Lord's favor against his, whoever he perceives to be his enemy, and so on. And so we have similar things like that in our rule, that we don't take those things. Yes, Carrie?
I got two
Yep,
examples.
yep. Yes, what are your examples? I'm sorry, come over here.
Number one is servicemen,
Yep,
and the other one would
Yes.
be members of societies like Knights of Columbus.
right. Do they take
What's
oaths?
the condition on those two?
Do they take oaths in Knights of Columbus?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Yeah,
Take oaths?
If you're an officer, you take an oath.
they swear allegiance to Our Lady.
Uh-huh. Well, I think that,
Well, another one is, an obvious negative would be the
Mason.
Masons.
Masons, yeah.
That would be, I think that's what they're getting at.
Yeah.
That's what they're getting at.
Because the Knights of Columbus is also a religious organization. So
Yes,
the oaths
it's-
they take are religious.
yeah, that said they're approved by the church and everything, so that's a different thing. You're talking about the
I should have
Pope here.
said Masons.
Right.
Yeah, the Masons would be, I think, a different thing, and any other.
Even as, and a lot of Catholics are confused about that because there has been a little bit of confusion, but it's been reaffirmed even recently
Yeah.
that Catholics are not allowed to be part of the Masonic Lodge.
Uh-huh,
And there was, I do remember a period where there was confusion about that.
Yeah.
And because some of the things were a little cloudy about
mhm, yeah,
it. And, you know, they were, not every priest was giving good guidance about that. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, you're not allowed to be a Mason.
okay.
Or the Shriners, or,
Shriners are part of that movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're an extension, they're the ceremonial arm of the Masons, basically, Shriners.
That just came up locally in the Knights of Columbus. A fourth degree member had died, and his wife refused the mass, and refused to have the rosary said, and it turned out he was a high level Mason.
Well, you know,
And, like, he didn't want any Catholic things for his funeral.
Oh, dear.
a lot of men in the United States, their dads were in the lodge, and you know, especially if they were converts. I remember in West Virginia,
Yeah,
we had a lot of
that's
people.
exactly.
A lot of people in the lodge, and it was like more of a social organization. They had the Shriners and stuff. But the ones who've gone through all those rites and stuff like the higher degree Masons, they have to go through a ceremony where they step on a mitre, bishop's mitre, and they have to say, "Down with the impostor," and they have to step on the mitre. I mean, the whole institution of Masonry came after during the French Revolution, and it was to undermine the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
The whole reason for the existence of Masonry is to undermine the Catholic Church. There is totally incompatible in any way. They portray it as this sort of universalism of all religions and all that, but then they are the determiners of it. The people at the very lower levels, they're not aware of all that stuff, but the ones that have like 33rd degrees and 32, they've been through all those ceremonies. They know exactly what it's about.
what about groups
And
like the
so-
Kiwanis or other
Yeah.
types of organizations?
Yeah, and what's the other one? The Kiwanis, and the other one is where they have it's a wheel, a gear, rotary. The Rotary. I would just generally advise people not to join Rotary clubs or those other ones, you know, that are just Catholics in general. You know, I mean, because we have a lot of social, like the Knights of Columbus. We have our own versions of doing good social things that you don't have to be part of these organizations that were very anti-Catholic in their origins. You know, so, and I think that's where this rule would definitely apply to those groups. But like, I think religious organizations that are within the church, like the Knights of Columbus, you know, that wouldn't exclude them. I mean, I'm a chaplain for the Knights in a 4th degree knight, but see, like for instance, I don't do their ceremony with the vows because I have my religious vows, but I've been through the ceremonies, you know, so. But we don't. There's certain parts of it that they don't have priests do because of the religious vows that we take. So, but this wouldn't. You know, that wouldn't apply to them, I don't
Okay,
think.
what about the serviceman issue?
Well, a service would be the same as police,
Yeah,
right? So a policeman is doing for the defense of others, right? He's to serve and to protect. Well, that's by the same way the military, they're there to protect the nation. And so, they're not, I think what this is referring to is in the Middle Ages, every gentleman carried like a sword or would carry a knife under for protection and things like that. And if you're, and also I think you could just see by the last phrase it says, "Do not take up lethal weapons or bear them about against anybody."
Yeah.
Right. So it's not saying this is like you're not prosecuting an offense. You're defending for the police, you're defending the township
Like the
or the
templars or
country.
the hospital or something.
Right. Or
Yeah.
the soldiers are defending the country, right? They're not taking up weapons against somebody. They're taking up in defense. This is, what was that? Chesterton said that, something like that.
Something like that,
Yeah, I forget exactly his quote on that. But, it's not that they hate the people that are in front of them, it's that they love the people that are behind them.
That's
Oh.
it, yeah.
That's the mentality.
Yeah.
It's so you're doing it in defense. So it's like even if you have a weapon in your house because you live in a very, dangerous area, or even a dog, for instance,
a dog could be a weapon, that's true,
right.
that's true.
So, to defend your family, so somebody comes into your house, does a rule of life require you to surrender and sacrifice your family for another person's act of violence? Of course not. So just as you have not only the right, but you have the responsibility to protect and defend those who are dependent upon you, the same would apply to your own person, in that sense. So it's not saying that if somebody kills you, but it's like brandishing power, so like carrying around a weapon just to show off, right?
Yeah.
Or using it in an aggressive way or in a criminal way. So it's against anybody, right? So that's different. That rather than, it doesn't say anything about defending, because that's presumed, right? That a father of a house has not only the right but the duty to protect the family, right? So
Right.
so I think you have to look at it in notes like what was the original intention? Original intentions was not to show off. Because I'm sure that in the Middle Ages, not only did they have weapons, but even people gloried in how glorious the weapon was.
Oh, yes,
and
yes,
how,
yes, yes, yes.
all that kind of stuff. So making an ostentatious show of power and,
Yep.
and prestige and things like that. I think that's what it was trying to get at. But you're talking about simple defense of life. That's actually a Christian duty.
Yeah,
Right,
and I think
so-
the oath for the servicemen, he was asking about the oaths.
Yeah.
I mean, if they have to take an oath to their country or whatever, to
Right.
defend it or whatever, they have to
Well,
take the servicemen.
Right, it's separate.
Like the
it's separate,
policeman, yeah,
And that's included in
the policeman, serviceman, yeah.
Right.
That's a different story
Right.
than just some lord somewhere that wants his property and wants a neighbor's property, whatever, yeah.
Right.
Okay,
The Scouts oath,
What's
the
that?
Scouts oath, like in Boy Scouts, there's the Scouts oath.
Oh,
Right.
They don't know anyway.
but that's an oath not to a person, that's an
No.
oath to
To an
a
idea.
morality, yeah, that's a different
And
thing.
it's not contrary to the faith at all, it's not like.
Yeah, that's a promise.
No, because, in fact, the Boy Scouts were, in the beginning anyway, it was a Christian-based organization. And really, those oaths were based on Christian principles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they haven't changed it at all.
Your oath was to God.
Right, and the oath
You
is to
know,
God.
you
Mhm.
believe in God.
Yeah, that's right, because when it says oaths,
Yeah.
it's talking about to men or to
Right.
other
To
causes.
another power.
Right, right.
Sure, something other
That was
than
to
God.
God, the Boy Scout.
There you go.
Mhm.
Perfect.
Yep. Okay. Let's see what we go on here.
It was God, country, and something, but it was God first.
Well, Ben would know because his girls are in the Cub Scouts.
I was with the Girl Scout for a while.
Okay, so if we go back to number 18 here, which we're talking about here, it says if they have sworn through a thoughtless slip of the tongue, as happens when there is much talking. They're to think over what they did at the end of the day and say, three Our Fathers. So our constitutions say if they make any, if they use, say something that's harsh or whatever during the day, when you're going over it, if you remember that you said something that was uncharitable, you can say the three Our Fathers to make amends. And then because he says you're supposed to fortify your household to serve God. So again, this is again against anger, against wrath when we thoughtlessly say things or maybe even purposely say them.
It's a different kind of oath. That's like a swear.
Yeah, that's like a,
Right.
yeah,
In Shakespeare, they use a lot of oaths like that, like zounds,
Yeah.
which is possibly shorthand for by his wounds.
uh-huh.
When, like in Shakespeare, when somebody says zounds or something, that's what they're probably referencing. It's just a short oath
Oh.
like that.
I didn't know that.
Oath, but, yeah.
Well, it could be, yeah. Okay. Now, the special mass and meeting each month, they're supposed to give, well, we do have our Zoom meetings. I guess you're probably getting notice about that. That has nothing to do with these cardinal sins. But you are supposed to try to meet each month as with other members of your confraternity. So if you don't have a local group, which is always the best, we do have the Zoom meetings that we can attend. But if I'm looking at number 20 here, each member is to give the treasurer 1 ordinary dinar. All right, that is that's against greed. You know, it's a little bit of generosity here. And a dinar was not that expensive. It was the smallest value coin minted at the time, so it's not very much. But you're supposed to, I mean, some of the people that were penitents didn't have much, so they didn't require them to give a lot, but they were supposed to give something. And that's why in our rule we don't require dues. Like we don't say you have to pay $100 a year dues or even $20 a year dues, because you shouldn't have to pay to do penance. But we do ask people to tithe, to give part of their tithe to the confraternity, and that would come from this about the ordinary dinar. Again, working against greed and being a little bit more liberal. Yes, Jim?
Is gambling a sin against greed?
I would think so. What do you say, Father? I mean, that's just, why should you be gambling in the first place? Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people buy their
Lotto.
tickets and,
Yeah.
their groceries and things like that. But, I mean, I think if you're following the rule, like what's the big deal? Just don't do it.
Just don't do it, yeah.
Don't do it, yeah.
Like, the chance of you hitting that lottery is like 1 in a trillion, gazillion,
Right.
whatever it is. So, I mean, I think it just symbolically is something to avoid.
Well, that's right. I think that's a good question.
And,
Yeah.
and the Land City and this Moore's some people get all excited about casinos and all that kind of stuff like that. But, I mean, again, that's just totally, recreational thing in the culture. And I think it is. I mean, I think it's, like, why would you be engaging in it at all? I mean, it's just, I mean, so if you're trying to just have some discipline about your life, I think avoid it.
Avoid gambling.
I think it would be-
I agree.
There's also ways with the borrowing. Now, you can borrow for a house or a car, but what about borrowing to make money, which is done very commonly in society? They borrow money in order to make money in the stock market, in options and stuff like that.
Well, I mean,
That would
our
not be in the rule.
province, we have investments for my work, and we rely on investments. So what we see that as a prudent use of the money of the faithful, right? So this is a diligent use. That's the virtue of diligence, right? So using properly the funds that are provided for our necessities and not squandering it, right? You first of all are grateful to people who are your benefactors. You always thank them, and then their money is put in our investments so that we don't draw on our principal, and we use prudently the money from our investments. And because of that, we're able to help missions all over the world. We have institutions that we put up in Tanzania, in Nigeria, and certainly our missions in Papua New Guinea and Puerto Rico required lots of money. Okay, I mean, one of our old missionaries, Father Ben, used to say the mission runs on money, the Holy Spirit and money, and not necessarily in that order.
I can't recall exactly, comparable about, I think it's 3 brothers that were given different amounts.
Yeah.
Right.
that's what they did.
And what they did with it, and the ones who invested it were the heroes, and the one that didn't just held on. to it.
Buried the treasure,
Yeah,
right?
was-
That's
And
the-
that, our Lord gave us
That's, I was gonna say,
that.
that's in the Bible.
Our Lord gave us that
Right.
image.
Yeah.
So, yes, that's what
Use
we
it
do.
wisely, yeah.
Yeah, use it wisely, and you don't squander it, and you're always grateful to people. You know, you're a steward.
Yeah.
You know, you're
Yeah.
a steward of what God provides because of, and you look at that as your own tithes that you provide for your church and things like that. That this is not my money. I'm a steward of the
Right.
gifts, first of all, that God gave me to be a money earner. That's first and foremost. That I tithe because of my gratitude to God for the ability to earn and to provide. And then from that, I express my gratitude to God through my tithes. And we even tithe as an order. We give 10% of our income to the poor or to missions or to whatever. So we also tithe even on the money that's given to us, right? So, so there's nothing immoral about that. In fact, that's part of a morally correct thing to do. Part of the virtue of diligence.
Now, Jim talked about borrowing.
Yeah, I'm talking about not investing. Investing is fine, because it's just, it's a matter of giving money to a company, and if they make money, you share that. I'm
Right.
talking about people who actually borrow money in order to leverage their investments. And of course, if it works, they get very rich, but of course, they also could be destroyed by it. Like, for example, the man who owed, was it 10,000 talents to his thing, that's conceivable if they had borrowed money in order to make more money for greedy purpose, and then of course it all doesn't work, then of course he had all this tremendous debt. So what I'm saying is the borrowing of money, the leveraging of money in order to really make more money besides what you have. So you have a certain amount of money, you invest it, okay, it goes up, that's fine. But if you borrow money, that's a different story, because then you not only are you sort of creating inflation in a certain sense, you also risk also of losing it.
That's
It's
not
a
a
form
wise
of
use.
gambling.
Yeah.
It really is a form of gambling.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah,
and we've excluded gambling.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would
Yeah.
advise against it.
Yeah, or like shorting, where you actually borrow a stock from somebody who you don't own it, you borrow from them on the idea that's going to go down, then you buy it back, then you actually buy it back later. In other words, and if you're very rich, you could actually force a stock downward, which you can take money from somebody by doing that if you have a lot of money. Like if I would be against you, if I have a lot of money, I could short all your stocks and drive them down and take a lot of money away from you without even, that's the thing.
Yeah, clearly not something.
Yeah, I think that stuff should be forbidden, but I guess,
Right.
unfortunately, it won't be forbidden, but anyway.
Right, exactly.
Yes, I think penitent should not do. Yes, that's against greed here, yeah, okay. Now, let me see what we have here. Okay, it talks about having, it talks about here, supporting your local group of people who might be poor or something for their funeral services who are penitents. In other words, that's a matter of charity. It would be, humility and just liberality here, to try to help people that are in need for in our local group that we need. And then it does talk about having a religious talk to them. That's why you should have a spiritual assistant in your group. That has nothing to do with this, with these 7 deadly sins. It's just increasing our faith. But it talks about performing the works of mercy, and except for the officers are to remain quiet during the Mass and sermon, intent on the office, on prayer, and on the sermon. I think to me that kind of goes with pride a little bit, because if you're quiet, you want to say something, it's better let's let the person talk who's giving the sermon, giving the homily, giving the talk, and not keep interrupting to get your own thoughts in there. I think maybe that's what I'm going to cover here, and then I'll save the rest of this for when we meet in the afternoon. Does anybody have anything they want to add to this, or suggestions or anything? Okay, now maybe you'll have time to look over this, and you can look over the parts we didn't talk about and see what might be attacked here, what sins might be attacked in these other parts of this. Okay? All right, so I think the next thing we have is Mass, I think. Is that what we have, or where's my schedule? Yeah, Mass with midday prayer followed by lunch, so that's at noon. Okay. Thank you.